Billy Graham once said, "The storm was raging, the sea was beating against the rocks in huge dashing waves. The lightning was flashing, the thunder was roaring, the wind was blowing, but the little bird was sound asleep in the crevice of the rock, its head tucked serenely under its wing. That is the peace, to be able to sleep in the storm." So what I wanted to talk about today was, I titled it Fears and Failures, but it more or less takes a course along the storms of our life. And one of the first questions is, where do these storms that we face come from? And what causes the rough seas and the howling winds that blow through our lives? And when this occurs, why are we so fearful? Why are we so afraid when it comes? And our passage today comes from Mark chapter 4, verses 35 through 41. And it says, "That day when evening came, he said to his disciples, 'Let us go over to the other side.' Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along, just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat, so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, 'Teacher, don't you care if we drown?' He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, 'Quiet, be still.' Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, 'Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?' They were terrified and asked each other, 'Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him.'" Now, it tells us in the first 3 verses that they were going over to the other side. So they got in the boat, and they headed out, and a storm come up. And these men were professionals. Most of them had spent any time on the water. We realize or know that Jesus had called some of them that were fishermen, so they were fairly familiar with being in a boat and being on the water and crossing to the other side. But this storm was different. Possibly it was the worst storm that they had ever seen. It was mentioned in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. All 3 tell a similar story. But I chose Mark's because he calls it a furious storm. And that's what got me to thinking about just who they were and how familiar they were for them to be able to, or for him to record about this storm and how violent that it was. So I was reading on along, and I was thinking about what makes us afraid when we're in a storm. And in verse 40, Jesus said, "Why are you so afraid?" And he asked them the same thing. And these are the disciples that he had called. They had seen and walked along with Jesus side by side, seen him perform very many miracles, and still they were afraid. So he asked them, how is it that all you've seen and heard, you still live in fear? Is it that you still don't believe in me, or you haven't learned to trust me? And I think the latter part of that statement really says it all, that you haven't learned to trust me. Is it still that you don't believe in me? I don't think that was it, and I certainly don't think it's it for most of us, and for myself included. In particular, I mean, I grew up in church, and I know and believe in Christ and what he can do, but haven't you learned to trust me? That's where it kind of gets to be kind of the statement that I think is really underlying and important. So I was kind of studying along and dug a little deeper, and just where do these storms come from? And storms sometimes come from our own rebellion or disobedience. And this is living outside the will that God has for his people, that he's called for you, for me, for all of us. And I was reading some Bible stories, and I found the story of Jonah. And I think about Jonah, who found himself in a storm that was caused by his own rebellion. And he was going to prove to God that he was not going. I was reading this last night. I told Allison I'd miss this word. Nineveh. Yeah. But he was going to Nineveh. And in the first 3, or in verse 3, for verses 3 through 5, it tells about Jonah and how he went down to Joppa, and then he went and he got on a ship, and he went down to the bottom of the ship, and then the storm came, and he went even deeper in the ship. And when the sailors realized that it was Jonah that was causing the storm, they threw him into the ocean. And we know that Jonah spent 3 nights and 3 days in the belly of the fish that swallowed him up. But storms sometimes are caused simply because of the world that we live in. We just live in a fallen and a sin-filled world. So sometimes I think we try to figure out what we did that made God angry with us, or that we think back to something from our past that we might be punished for. And these things, these storms that pop up in our lives, sometimes they just pop up, and it doesn't mean that we've done anything. And I think the more that we learn and realize about God, that He's not an angry God that's just kind of sitting up there on the throne, and He just wants to kind of zap us, when we do wrong or punish us. And the storms we face are just things that are a result of the world that we live in. The book of Matthew, chapter 5, verse 45 says, He makes the sun rise on the evil and the good. He sends the rain on the just and the unjust. And sometimes our storms that we face can be from our enemy, from the devil. And in our passage it also tells us that Jesus got up and He rebuked this storm. And the way that Mark uses rebuke is the way that he uses it every time that he rebuked the demons out of the people that He was healing. And if we don't believe that Satan will bring a sudden storm into our life, just try to spend more time with God in prayer or in service, or just even trying to get closer to Him. The book of Peter, 1 Peter 5:8 says, Be sober and vigilant, because your adversary the devil walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. So I was doing a little more research or looking, and I found a definition of devour. I found several, but the one that I chose, it says devour, to destroy, to consume, violent. And that kind of got me to thinking about kind of the way that the devil can do our lives. And Peter also talks about a roaring lion, and if you watch like Discovery Channel or anything on TV where you see these lions and they just kind of come out of the brush or the high weeds and they attack violently and just overtake and devour their prey, that is a good definition, but it also brings to mind a Casting Crowns song that's called Slow Fade. And I don't think any of us ever wake up one day and just decide, that we're just devoured, that we're overtaken, that the devil has got us. But it's all just such a slow fade in the way that we can be in our normal life, and what we hear and what we talk about and what we see or listen to. And all of that stuff is just the way that the devil can kind of place, thoughts in your mind or stumbling blocks in your path, and just kind of, as Casting Crowns says in the song, it's just a slow fade when you give yourself away. And a lot of times I know that that's the devil's greatest trick, is just to kind of place some doubts and some fears and some failures in your path. And that's really why I chose my title with Fear and Failure. Sometimes I think we can let ourselves get devoured by things that we failed at. No matter what we've done in our lives, we've had failures in our lives from the time that we've grown up until now. And our fears can be a result of some of that failure. Even standing up here today, I normally, take a Sunday a year, but sometimes you just kind of feel like when you got done, that it just didn't really do like you thought it should have went, or you just kind of failed at it. And there again, I know that that's the devil that places that fear in there. And that was one thing that when I went to the basic lay speaking class, that one of the instructors, and it was also a good friend of David's, Don Freshour, he was one of our instructors that day. And he talked about that being a big part of it for even, pastors like yourself. So that kind of made me not be okay with it, but realize that it wasn't just me and I wasn't the only one that was just afraid, to stand up and say what God has called and led you to say. And regardless of how you failed in our lives, that we just, that keeps us moving forward, and that we always have to keep our faith and trust in God and keep moving forward for that goal. And now that we've talked about where some of these storms come from, I think the main thing to take away from this passage is that the disciples faced this great storm, but that first of all they had Jesus in their boat. And when they started out to go to the other side, they had Jesus with them as this storm comes up. And I was following along with the sermon that I had found online and taking some points from it. But at one point in there, it was, wouldn't it be great if once we had placed Jesus in our boat, we started off to the other side, that when this storm came up and we made it through, that was all there was. That, you know, we'd received our testimony and we didn't have to worry about any other storms or any other trials in our life, that was all. And we had overcame it. But do you know that, or do you know anyone that hasn't gone through a storm? And sometimes you kind of look around and you feel like you might. I mean, I know that I have. You know, their lives just look like it's smooth sailing, and you feel like you're about to go under any minute. You know, you just feel like that you can't. You done got to the end of your rope and tied a knot in it, and you just hanging on for dear life, and they just seem like everybody around is just smooth sailing right along. And then you say to God, you know, this isn't fair. You know, how come I have so many, you know, trials and storms, and they don't seem to have any? And the point that they were trying to make was, you know, he said, let me share this with you. Each and every one of us is either coming out of a storm, in the middle of a storm, or a storm is on the horizon. And I feel like, I didn't take this from that, but I wanted to add to it, I really feel like the ones that seem like the sailing is so smooth is the ones that really kind of have it figured out. And they really have already been able to place their trust in Christ Jesus and know that no matter what happens in that storm, if He doesn't calm the storm, He will calm His child in the storm. And that's where we need to take the peace from that. And like I say, some of these people that I speak of are very good, you know, Christian people. And now that I have kind of reflected on it some, I do realize that it's really not just that they haven't had any storms, that it's just that they have a firm hold here, anchor holders. And some of the people that I always like to speak about in that case was like Allison's grandpa, Howard. He just always seemed, no matter what happened, you know, what popped up, it just didn't matter. He was just always a model example to how I feel like, you know, a good Christian man was. And I mean, there was times in his life that several members of his family had lived there. He just, you know, regardless of their circumstance, it was just no matter how much room they had, it was just come home and make yourself at home. And he truly was, when he said, what's mine is yours, I mean, he meant it. You know, it wasn't that you got a false sense of that, or that there was any stipulations on that. I mean, literally, when he said, whatever I have is yours. I mean, that's the way he was, and that's the way he lived his life. And I always try to reflect on people like that, to model my life after. And as we talk about some of the storms that come in our lives and other people's lives as well, and the ones that are on the horizon and whatnot, it just kind of brings me to a point to where we look around and our world seems to be just a storm on all fronts. And we just have so many of these mass shootings and killings, radical groups that seem to be popping up everywhere now. It just seems to be, and one of the new topics, and I know it's not new, but it is new for a generation like mine, is, you know, all of the race kind of riots and things that are going on. And I've seen on the news where they talk about how in the late 60s and 70s and stuff, a lot of this was similar. But it is something that I had never seen or been familiar with. And, you know, one statistic I think I heard when they had the shooting in Florida a few weeks or a month or so back, that there had been like 14 shootings since Obama had been in office. I mean, that's 8 years. I mean, that's almost 2 shootings a year. And not to say that that's President Obama's fault or anything, it's just to say that was the timeline that they used, and that was just kind of a big shock to me to realize that, I won't say that, you know, it's a new normal, but it just seems like there's so many of that things that are going on. And that's some of the things I guess I wanted to hit on about kind of the slow fade of our world and ourselves can be with our enemy and the devil that's kind of looming around. And I know that, you know, there's so many things going on like that, and so many things that are going on with our politics, but it just also reminds me, like David said a Sunday or two ago, I mean, his words were, I don't have 1 ounce of hope in Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton. And I know David didn't mean that as a derogatory way toward either one of them, also heard on 106.9 Franklin Graham say a similar type statement. But the point there is that I do have complete and total faith in my God. And folks, that's really enough. I mean, that's all we need to be able to stand in some of these things. And I know that it seems like it's terribly hard. And that brings me to my next point, when I'd like to talk about some of my storms. And I feel that living by faith is very, very easy for me to say. I mean, I think that's an easy statement for all of us to say. But for me, it's extremely hard to do. It's extremely hard for me to stand and see these storms and see these things that face me and realize that it's God. That's all I need. No matter what. From here on out, I will stand on the Word of God. And I feel like that's a journey. I feel like it's a spiritual journey. And I feel like maybe for some people they can obtain and reach that very quickly or very easily. Like I say, myself, for example, I feel like I struggle with that on a daily basis. I feel like sometimes I can just let the worry and the fear of these things kind of consume me. And it's been a couple of weeks, I guess, I don't know, maybe 3. Just seems like it's kind of been a rough go, you know, in what I do, working and being self-employed, and it's just easy to kind of get caught up in some of the things that you feel like your mind can kind of run away with. You know, if you have trouble with a client, or you know, you lose a client, or anything, you just kind of feel like sometimes it's going to start to snowball and run away from you. And, you know, it threatens maybe who I am or who I think I am, and it threatens of, you know, sometimes you think it kind of threatens of your livelihood, and it's just hard for me. It's just hard to stand up and say, you know, Lord, I know that this is a storm, and I know that I'm going to go through this storm, and I know that no matter what, that you have me, oh God, and I can stand in that, and I can stand in you. And the biggest example of this for me now is to tell a vintage story. And you know, we've had a lot going on with Benny. You know, we celebrated so much last week, and I really don't want to just keep talking so much about it, but it is so much a part of mine and Allison's testimony now that I just feel that I have to share it. So, so we started, and we got a call from the hospital that Monday, and you know, there was just a lot of sudden joy, but there was just so many things that was fearful about it as well. I mean, literally in 30 seconds, I had completed a normal day, or what I thought was a normal day. I had went to work. It was in the winter time. We were getting a lot of rain, so I finished up early. I went to the barn, just trying to kind of kill some time, stay busy, whatever. I pulled my truck and trailer into the barn hall, and I was cleaning it out. You know, and I worked a couple hours. And then when I left there, it was Monday, which, you know, as David has spoke on before, you know, about being gym night. You know, a lot of us in the congregation go to the gym on Monday and Thursdays. So I was going home, picked Dad up, we were going to the gym. 20 minutes to 6, my phone rings. So in about a 30-second conversation, I have went from a normal day to being a dad to this child is in Greensboro. He weighs 3 pounds and 10 ounces. He's born at 33 weeks. You know, I have no idea as to how we're going to get up and back and forth up there. Like I said a while ago, being self-employed, traveling back and forth. You know, they didn't have anywhere for us to stay, and I don't say that as it is a bad way or anything like that, but a lot of places have their own house and things like that, and Greensboro didn't have anything like that. So we were going to have to be staying in some motels, and naturally, you know, telling Allison this news, there was pretty much no way I was going to see her unless I went to Greensboro, because that's where she was going to be for the whole 6 weeks. So I was kind of worried about her staying in a motel by herself in Greensboro, and not that Greensboro is a terrible place, but like I spoke on earlier before, you know, just kind of the world that we live in, you know, it kind of made me nervous. So, you know, I was trying to work, trying to go back and forth. And I guess probably one of the scariest times I've ever been in my life was we went up there the first time and come home, and we went back the second time. and it was on a Thursday, and Allison was going to spend that night. That was the first night she was going to stay. Because we had realized that just the travel time alone, and by, you know, just not necessarily the price of gas, but with driving back and forth close to 6 hours, it was just made a lot of sense for Allison to go and spend the night, stay the next day, and then come home. So we left the hospital about 11 o'clock or 11:30, and I drove her over, not in downtown Greensboro, but fairly close. I mean, it's a big city. I mean, we're outside of our city here, and that's another one that makes me a little nervous. But, you know, we got her checked into a motel, and, I mean, you know, I got her in a room, and I mean, I left and come home. And that was one of the hardest things I ever had to do. But, looking back on it, you can always find God's peace in that. Because when we walked in, there was a couple of guys that was working desks. And I mean, unbeknownst to me, I thought when you got to a motel, you could pretty much walk in and check in at any time. I mean, that's the way I remember it when I was a kid. But now, them in Greensboro at least, some of them even had armed security guards that worked, but the ones that didn't had the doors locked. So somebody had to let you in the door, and then you could go to the desk and, you know, see about checking in or getting a room or whatever. So that was another thing I was kind of worried about. I mean, I thought, what kind of place is this? They got locked up the door, you know. You can't lock it. But the guy we talked to happened to be from Ellenboro. I mean, we told him where we were from, and he knew where Sandy Mush was, had worked in and around Ellenboro, Far City, Bowling Springs, and it was just like I say, looking back on it now, and I didn't see it at the time, but it was God's way of saying that everything was okay, you know, that we were where we were supposed to be, that He had us, and we were fine. So, a few days go by, week, you know, we get into Christmas time. And one of the other hardest things about it, and I think you kind of, at the time, we knew it was there, but we just didn't want to think about it. We just didn't want to talk about it. We didn't really want to mention it to ourselves or to one another. But the state of North Carolina has a 7-day period to where a mother can change her mind. And they gave us that call. He was born on Sunday, and they gave us that call on Monday. So we received our call, and into the hospital once, went back the second time, and we're still in this 7-day period. You know, we're still in this thought, and you have these thoughts in the back of your mind that, you know, hey, I mean, all of this could be over just for one phone call. And I mean, Allison even said one time, our social worker up there, her name was Stephanie, and she told Stephanie, she said, if you call me, I ain't answering. She said, I'm just telling you, right now, I ain't answering. And Stephanie tried her best to assure Allison, or reassure Allison, that everything was okay. But still, it's just something that is very hard to place out of your mind until it comes. But we made it through that. And one day, you know, I was riding down the road, and I had talked to Allison, as I did a lot, you know, normally once or twice a day. And I would check on him, and just, you know, there were things that we were looking for him to start to do that we knew that he was doing good. And one thing was starting to eat, take his bottle, and it was a few weeks before he did that. But once we got to that point, it was all great. But I was talking to Mom one day, and, you know, I was just, I don't know, I just had a lot of doubts and fears, I guess. And she said, well, son, what are you worried about? And I said, well, I don't really know. I said, I guess I'm just kind of worried that, you know, this 7 days would be up, and, you know, or wouldn't be up, and, you know, that she would come back, or, you know, there was just several fears that I had, you know, that something would happen up there with him, you know, with all the traveling we were doing. And she said, well, son, let me tell you what you need. She said, this is what I do. She said, I want you to pray. Simply. Just say, Lord, give me what I need today. She said, don't worry about tomorrow. Don't worry about next week. Don't worry about next month. Just give me what I need today. So that was my prayer for 6 weeks. Lord, just give me what I need today. And I shared that with Allison. And it didn't seem to honestly, it didn't seem to help her the way that it did me. But once we got home, because she was a rock up there. I mean, as steady as a rock, no matter what. I mean, she got in her car, got in my truck, whatever, drove, took off, you know, didn't worry a lick about it. And I know that it was just all the joy and the excitement that came with it. But it was her child, or our child, and that's where she felt she needed to be all the time. And I completely understood that. It wasn't an issue at all. But when we got home, roles kind of reversed. Because the rock that I had seen in Greensboro had rolled away. I mean, I had no idea as to the way all this was, you know. And I mean, it's the same deal. I mean, we're home, and everything's great, and you know, I'm still trying to work some, and you know, doing how best I can. And I mean, I felt like, hey, I've been a parent for 6 weeks, Jack. I got this going. And I thought she felt the same way. But it wasn't the case. But there again, I prayed every day, Lord, just give me what I need to do. And I prayed, Lord, just give Allison what she needs to do. And I think that, well, I don't think out there again, I know that the Lord done it. And I think what she needed was me and Courtney and Lauren and her mom and my mom and just the people around her to know, to tell her, to reassure her, you know, that everything was fine and she was capable of all of this, and you know, we were rocking along just fine and everything was going just wonderful. So I never doubted in all of this that this was God's plan for my life, and that's not where this is all geared. But there's just so many things about it that I want to take some points from it in just a few minutes when I finish telling you about it. But one more thing that I feel like is very important in looking back on is that Bennett was born on Sunday, like I said. And he was born in Greensboro. He was at the women's hospital when we went to see him, but that's not where he was born. There's a couple of 3 hospitals up there, and he was born at one of them, but they transferred him over there because that's where the NICU unit was. But Bennett was born on Sunday. And there's 2 social workers that work for the Cone healthcare system. And one of them works Monday through Friday, and the other one works Saturday and Sunday. And a couple of weeks that went by when we were going up there to see him, Allison and myself too got to become very good friends with several other nurses, but one in particular that Allison was close to, and she was there a lot. They developed a very close relationship, her and a couple of them actually. But she was telling Allison, she said, if he hadn't been born on Sunday, y'all wouldn't have it. And we didn't understand really what that statement meant. But she went on to explain that the social worker that works on Monday through Friday calls an adoption agency in Charlotte. And the one that works on Saturday and Sunday calls Children's Home Society, which is who we work with. So if there was ever any doubt that this wasn't part of God's plan, which, like I say, it never was. It was just another way to reiterate and for us to know that God had placed His job with us. And that should be enough to take care of all those fears and doubts. And I guess that brings me to the point that I want to make about my life. And I mean, folks, this has just been 6 or 7 short months ago. So why in the world, having seen that and being able to testify to that in my very own life, would I want to stand up or wake up one day and feel like that the storm is fixing to overtake my life? I mean, what I have seen and done should be more than enough to stand up. But I guess I just get the encouragement from like the disciples being able to see and walk with Jesus, and for them to feel like they were being overtaken. It reassures me that we're all just human. That it's just the way things are. And there's just so many things that I have learned in the previous few months. And I have such a remarkable story to tell you about it. And I know that there's so many people that have similar type stories that may not be as joyful as ours is. But I just know that I still wake Jesus up and say, you know, Lord, don't you care that I'm fixing to die? You know, that this storm's fixing to overtake my life and then I'm going down. So, in conclusion, I have realized that our human growth and our spiritual growth can be very similar. And as we grow and mature physically, we also mature spiritually. And these storms that we come through are what makes us the people that we are. What makes me the person that I am. For the first thing that we have to do is we have to have Jesus in our life. And we realize that it's not the storm that wakes Jesus up. He already knew that the storm was coming. He already knew that they were going to the other side. He didn't say, let us try to go to the other side. I hope we make it to the other side. He said, let us go to the other side. So he knew where they were, and he knew the obstacles that were going to be in their path. But he also knew that they were going to the other side. So we just have to ask him to help us. We just have to learn to trust in him always. And just like with me, there are so many things that were out of our control. And I knew that it was all in God's control. And that never bothered me up there. I mean, we didn't really have a whole lot of say in anything that we done. I mean, we had free access to come and to visit and to see him. But as far as any decisions medically that were made, you know, they wasn't in control of us at the time. You know, we couldn't control to get him brought closer to home. You know, there was just so many things that they just told us this is how it is, or this is the way it is. And, you know, we just followed along. And really kind of examining my own life, that's very much not like me. I mean, I kind of have a problem with control. I mean, I don't like to fly. I don't like to get on a boat. I don't like to do much anything outside of what I can just get in my car and go, because I feel like I have control to come home. And it was just all such a peace that God placed in my life. And like I say, I know that y'all heard a tremendous amount about me in the story lately, but I just feel like I wouldn't be the person that I am today without that in my life. And I just never want to let a chance go by to testify to how great God is. And it's like I said last week, and we were playing golf with his stepdad, and that's where I got that. And I mean, we had a lot of fun. It was hot, but you know, we all hit the ball fairly well. I mean, we were just after kind of weekend hackers, but you know, Kevin would say, "What a golf!" You know, he'd hit the ball, and it might not go that far. He'd say, "What a golf!" He'd say, "Ain't God good, boys? Ain't God good?" And that's really just the way I think we're all called to live our life. I mean, we know that God's good, and why do we dwell on some of these things that come our way? And it's not always going to be easy, but God knows that we can get through those. Our closing